If you're thinking about buying an electric vehicle, Ottawa is making it more enticing with a federal subsidy for EVs that restarts today. It will pay up to $5,000 if the purchase price is below $50,000. Now, although that cap does not apply to Canadian-made EVs, the savings are applied by the dealership right at the time of sale, and the subsidy hinges on that final purchase price. Chinese-made EVs will not be eligible for the program. The CBC's Marianne Demain tells us more about this program.
This is all a part of the federal government's electric vehicle affordability program, and it starts today, trying to encourage Canadians to buy or lease a Canadian-made electric vehicle. And there are incentives here. Here's a look at some of the incentives. They include up to $5,000 for battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles, and up to $2,500 for plug-in hybrid vehicles. Now, in order to qualify for these incentives, these electric vehicles have to be made in Canada or be made in a country with free trade agreements with Canada. That includes countries, of course, like the United States, Mexico, some European countries like Germany, even Japan and South Korea. There is a final transaction value of the vehicle that cannot exceed $50,000. There is no limit when it comes to the vehicles actually made in Canada. Exempt from this right now, electric vehicles made in China. That's part of a separate deal that Prime Minister Mark Carney made with Beijing recently. But we do know that China makes more than 100 electric vehicle brands, including big U.S. brands like Tesla, which does have some of its models made in China. But even before all of this, there were already Chinese-made electric vehicles exported by Volvo and even Polestar to Canada. Now, the focus of this latest program is affordability. And we did hear from the president and CEO of Plug and Drive saying that this push for affordability to make things much more accessible for Canadians could lead to an increase in electric vehicle sales.
EVs are much cheaper to operate, so they are cheaper in the long run, even without a rebate. But what we are seeing is that people were waiting because they did hear from a few members of the government that rebates were coming. And so I think you'll see quite a burst of activity in the next few months.
While this program starts today, it is not forever. It only runs until March 31st, 2031. That is, unless funding runs out before then. Otherwise, it is first come, first serve. Marianne Demain, CBC News, Toronto.
And as we mentioned, Chinese EVs are excluded from this program, but some people worry they pose major national security and privacy concerns. For more on this, we have reached Stephanie Carvin in Ottawa. She's a former national security analyst and associate professor at Carleton University. Stephanie, thank you so much for making time for us.
Hey, always great to be on.
Stephanie, what should Canadian buyers keep in mind when trying to decide whether to purchase a Chinese-made EV?
Well, other than the fact we've just had a very cold winter, and I don't know yet if we've seen how they perform, I think one of the main issues is that, yes, these are vehicles that are going to be hoovering up large amounts of data, pretty much, where you, not just where you drive and when you drive and where you live, but also it may be listening to what you say. It may look at which stores you're going to. So it really can, individually and en masse determine what's called patterns of life, which could be useful, for, to be fair, for automotive development and for looking at what could actually be, further research when they're developing their products and services, but also that could be passed on to the Chinese government. We know that because of their national security legislation, that, it could be basically giving a lot of this data, which is almost certainly to be stored in China, to the government. So yeah, there are reasons to be concerned in that way.
We know that the Conservative leader, the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, and the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, have criticized the deal, with the Conservative leader calling the EVs roving surveillance systems. I think Doug Ford called them spy cars. What do you make of that?
So yes and no. I think like I just said, we do need to be concerned and aware of the data issues. But that being said, all these politicians are on TikTok. A lot of these politicians are using devices and apps, which quite frankly harvest huge amounts of data, which are then sold by two third-party vendors who then go on to sell it even more. So even if you don't have a Chinese EV, if you're using a lot of apps, your data is being collected, harvested, and could easily be purchased by China. So this isn't just strictly a EV problem. I think we need to look at this in the context of a larger data problem that we have with regards to how our data is collected, harvested, and stored. China doesn't need EVs to spy on us, right? It can get a lot of the information that it needs right now, and I think that's the key thing here to remember. And in addition, I think it's really important for us to put pressure on politicians to do more about that. Now, that being said, I think the issue is, even if we were able to fix a lot of our data and privacy laws, it's not clear to me that a Chinese company would refuse to or would adhere to Canadian law if put under pressure by Beijing. So that is one mark against the spy cars, as the premier put it. But I mean, this issue is just so much larger than just EVs. This is about large scale data collection by the Chinese government in ways that could potentially be weaponized against us.
Stephanie, I want to ask you, I mean, you said that people need to put pressure on the government to do something to make them safer or to mitigate some of these security risks. What kind of precautions would you like to see the government do to check for, frankly, security vulnerabilities in the incoming electric vehicles?
Well, it's so interesting because when I think about this issue, I think of the debates that we had over Huawei like a decade ago. And ultimately, the government did decide to ban Huawei, right? They said, there was pressure from allies and there was concerns about security. But also there was concerns about the fact that the government of China heavily subsidizes these companies. And they are trying to position their state champion companies to undermine Western firms so that they will dominate in these sectors. And that's also true of EVs. So I think that's one consideration. And we need to make sure that, as these cars are brought in, that, we are trying to figure out what is going to be the future of the auto industry. Now, that being said, with regards to the actual data collection, one of the things we did with Huawei prior to it being banned was we had the government set up something called white labs. And these were labs that were used to effectively monitor the technology, monitor the data, look for holes, look for back doors and things like that to ensure that the technology was in fact as safe as possible, and that effectively the government knew what it was doing when it was putting up these 5G systems. So I think in theory we could probably do the same with EVs, have these things tested as much as we can, and try to apply as much layered security. But ultimately, I think Canadians, when they purchase one of these vehicles, they're effectively making a trade-off, and I think they just need to be aware of that. That yes, you're getting a cheaper vehicle, arguably a better made vehicle by all accounts. I'm not a car expert, but any of the reviews out there are particularly glowing. So you can't have one of these cars, but you do need to understand that there are going to be trade-offs, and the government, between privacy and perhaps tech checks, should be doing a lot to protect Canadians.
Right, and that do your due diligence as a consumer, I guess, at the end of the day. Stephanie,
absolutely.
Stephanie, thank you so much for your expertise. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Stephanie Carvin is a former national security analyst and associate professor at Carleton University.